Okay, we are going.
Yeah, apologies to you. Great report, but we've stuffed stuff around.
Probably.
Yeah.
Good. Shuffle the deck. Good morning, everyone, and we'll just reconvene the Finance Committee meeting of the 23rd, now being the 24th, as designed at 9 o'clock this morning. So welcome back. It doesn't seem that long ago that we saw your bright, breezy faces on Zoom or sitting in the chamber. So, yeah, 12 hours, good. We have an apology for the lateness for Councillor Laws. If someone would like to move that, Councillor Hope, seconded Councillor Wilson. Those in favour? Aye. Thank you. Well, we'll move straight on to the continue agenda item where we'd left off, and it is item 8.4, and this paper results from a request from councillors to have a look at we requested a report back in August of last year to see the possibility of offering Enviro schools to all schools and other education centres in Otago, and the territorial funding that would be required to do that. So I'm going to hand this paper straight to Mr. Saunders, who's in the chamber with us, and I'll leave that to you, Richard. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. I think we've got Robin online.
Oh, lovely.
Might be here tucked in behind the picture there, so I can't see. So
yes, I am here.
Morning, Robin. So this paper is, as Kevin said, just provided after the resolution passed last year around options to provide Enviro schools to every school in Otago. So what you will note first up is that we haven't put a series of options here for you as part of the annual plan process. We've just provided some information, I guess, for consideration of councillors, and we're happy to ask questions and for you to decide how you might carry this forward. But what we have included in there is a summary of what the current situation is, a summary of the schools that are currently in the program, not in the program. And we've used a formula that I've discussed with Robin to sort of estimate the resource that would be required if every school were to take up the option of being an Enviro school. And I have flagged in there that it is unlikely that every school would sign up, but we don't know because we haven't had that conversation. And my I guess the other thing that hasn't happened is we haven't had a proper discussion with our TLA partners, which would have to happen given that they currently employ, either directly or through contract resource, the facilitators that work with the schools within their district. So that, look, I think the best thing to do is just to move to questions on the paper and then go from there. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Questions, Councillor Wilson.
Kia ora. Thank you for the report. And I think I've got a question for the chair, actually. Would he see that this is something that would be better dealt with at the Mayors and Chairs Forum and taken up and saying, look, this is the opportunity, this is the cost. Are you interested in doing it in this current annual plan? And I know there's a lot of pressure, but, or is it one that we say we're really keen to do and actually submit on their annual plans, which is really clunky?
Yeah, I would suggest that, yeah, a good idea to flesh out our thinking with the other TAs. I think that would be a good idea. I'd like us to perhaps, and I was going to ask a question, but I'll wait until you finish for Robin about alternative funding and whether there is opportunities nationally for, and Robin may know this with other coordinators that she converses with from time to time, is there some Jobs for Nature or some other type funding that could be tapped into? But that was a question, but I think good idea to go to Forum.
Can I'll just make one, because I think that's, and then I might just make one point and then hand over to Robin to have a bit of a talk about the funding, if we take that as a question, Andrew. What I would say is that there is a significant amount of work to that would need to be done to grow the program on this scale. And the point that I've tried to make in the report is there is no way that can be taken on under the current 0.8 coordination role that Robin fulfills. That is maxed out, supporting the facilitators to run the current program Otago wide. So there is if there was a desire to go down that path, there would have to be some funding provided for a specific resource to map out and deliver the expansion of the program. It's very much over and above the current resource that we provide as ORC to coordinate the EnviroSchools program. So just something to bear in mind. And maybe, Robin, can I hand over to you just to talk a little bit about funding alternatives, if there are any, or what you know from other regions?
Yes, thank you, Richard. So generally, like that other funding alternative, such as Jobs for Nature or sponsorship, has been explored quite extensively by the national team, because they do get approached by various organisations occasionally to say, can we sponsor or support EnviroSchools in some way? And that the general feeling has been not to go down that path, because the program relies on building long-term relationships, and those funding sources tend to be quite short-term. Even if it is for 2 or 3 years, that's quite a short-term relationship in the work that we do, which is why Toimata has always focused on building relationships with councils and seeking funding through that long-term process.
Yeah, go Andrew. Yep. Yeah, no, good. And then we've got Brian Scott straight up to you, Andrew. Yep.
So, Robin, this is a little bit, it is a little bit connected. So I just want to share with you, I had a conversation a few days ago with the project manager of the Dunedin Hospital build. And he said that his funding that comes through Ministry of Health requires a degree of recognition that social, economic and environmental impacts on the wider region need to be met in some way, shape or form. And I'm just wondering, with the Ministry of Education, whether there's any such clause that funding that comes through from that ministry, would it have a similar type of clause, or maybe that's not the case?
So, sorry, so you're asking whether the Ministry of Education has that sort of clause in it, or the Ministry of Health?
No, sorry. No,
Robin, maybe I'll have a go at answering that, because I think, Andrew, what you might be referring to is the procurement policies for capital funding and even operational funding. So just thinking back to prior jobs where we procured, there were requirements within those tenders for bidding parties to demonstrate social, environmental and economic contributions to the region in which the contract was being delivered. And I think that would definitely apply for the hospital in terms of the contracts they're letting for construction over that 10, 12-year period. Ministry of Education, I would suggest, and we could certainly look into it, but that funding is more for the running of the schools and the support resources, and is probably slightly different to that contracted funding, which definitely now, as does ours, where Gavin's providing contracts, has clauses in there around social, economic and environmental in terms of part of the assessment process. Yeah.
Thank you.
Brian.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. 2 questions. Well, first is to Robin, actually, just quick off the cuff. I mean, having more EnviroSchools, is that actually a good idea? I mean, like we've currently got over half our primary and intermediate and secondary, and 60%, 50% of composite schools. Assuming that that you max out at about 80% or 70%, like, is it a good idea, Robin, or are we barking up the wrong tree?
Well, we are getting requests from schools as to becoming Enviro that do want to become Enviro schools. So there is some there is some unmet demand out there. But yeah, I just want to reiterate with what Richard said. Not all schools will want to become an Enviro school. So that's not my goal, is to have every school as a Enviro school.
And through the chair, so what is actually the limiting factor for limiting that growth? We're currently at 60%. The phone rings, someone to join. What's the limiting factor?
Facilitator capacity.
It's facilitator capacity. Okay.
And sorry, Brian, and coordination capacity. Robin is conveniently forgetting that she has no capacity.
Yeah. Okay, so because what, and my final question, sorry, Kevin, is
no, it's good.
Like if I'd love to have looked at that growth curve over time, how we got to 60%. And like as a council, are we sort of thinking, we're going to jump up to 80%, or should it be a more natural sort of growth, Robin? Because you're talking about long-term relationships. So it's not about banging in another 8 FTEs or whatever the number is. Shouldn't we be just incrementally moving forward? That's a question.
I would think that, it's a more of an organic process. I agree with you there, Councillor Scott, but for that organic process to happen, we need the capacity in the system to enable that.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Calvert.
Just a reminder that this report came about because we know schools that have been dying to get on the Enviro Schools program can't. There are some schools that have been very fortunate to have it all of their time, and yet we're not prepared to take it off them. And I get that. So, but there's some children and some regions that have never had a chance to have the program run. And that's why we're looking at this. The question is then opening the doors. Do you do it that you really push it out? And which would be requiring us to have significant investment immediately, or do you do it more just meeting the demand as it comes in? And so I just wanted to say that because I think our role caring about the environment is education, and we constantly talk about education programs. So the question for you, Robin, is in your time at Enviro Schools, which has been not only substantial but highly productive, what has the difference been that you've seen make in the democratic process and in the ability for you to message things that the ORC are working on to not only the people you're working with, but their families? And by the way, you win hands down on the backdrop on your Zoom picture.
Thank you. I'm just trying to, I guess.
Don't be modest.
Some of the differences that we see happening is schools are getting much more engaged with their communities, and I think we're seeing that particularly over the last 2 or 3 years. So becoming much more involved, and I'm just thinking of, for example, Cromwell Primary, that the students there have established the junior Guardians of the Lake there, and are doing some, really pushing some really exciting projects, and trying to get the other schools in Cromwell on board with that. There's been, developing those relationships between schools and catchment groups, for example, and that's an area of work we are focusing quite a bit more on. So I would say that's one of the big differences in terms of democratic process. We do work with students and helping them engage with councils and with government on a whole range of ways. So supporting students to write submissions, supporting students to present to council, things like that, and just making them aware of the difference their voice does make and can make, and how they can make themselves heard. And certainly in the next few months, we'll be doing a lot of work with students around local body their local body elections and making sure that they have a voice in that in some way.
Thank you.
Councillor Calvert, and then Councillor Calvert, Councillor Deaker, then Councillor Hope.
I get the impression that we're getting more of you, Robin, than we're paying for. And I'm wondering, I'm not asking that, that isn't my question, because that's a statement. But my question is, if we had a general desire to try and let it grow a bit, you know, as it wants to organically, would the first step be to pay you a little more? And I appreciate, I mean, you know, to increase the number of your whatever, to allow for you to be interacting with the potential schools and seeing what facilitation may or may not work, if how it might grow. So like if you had 10 schools in the next 3 months or 6 months or something who wanted to join and couldn't yet, that to give you a little bit of freeboard that will allow you to think, how would that happen? Would we therefore need to sort of approach Queenstown Lakes and encourage them to put a wee bit more of a resource in there, or some, you know, would that be a useful sort of thing? I'm just thinking, because rather than try and do something big or put something in there and make it do something, just it looks like an organic thing of itself.
Yeah. Yes. So yes, I think one of the pieces of work that does need to happen, as Richard said, is a lot more work with the TAs, and the three in particular are Dunedin City, Clutha and Waitaki, because CODC and QLDC currently already fund all the schools in their district. Certainly if we wanted to move into the early childhood sector space, that would require a lot more conversation with all the TAs to increase the funding to enable that to happen. But and to do that work, as you say, Councillor Calvert, does require some extra time and resource, and whether that's that goes, that to have that in the position of regional coordinator, I think would be a huge benefit.
Okay, yes, I'm not thinking of sort of making, right, we'll go and get X more schools or anything, but to be able to respond to a demand rather than going to create one or whatever. But if there's a demand there, to allow that, the bottleneck appears to be our resourcing of you, essentially, a bottleneck, which partially is.
Yes.
Is that?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the bottleneck ORC can control, I guess. And then, if that bottleneck was opened a bit, then yes, I could spend more time working with the TAs to try and support that funding, to increase the funding towards Enviro schools that they provide.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think Robin's covered that off really well. The two critical things for the coordination role is the support of the facilitators. So not necessarily working with the schools directly, but ensuring the facilitators are well supported and well connected to the program. And then the relationships with the TLAs, which is not a small task, particularly in a large geographic area like Otago. So that relationship needs to happen at a political level, at a senior staff level, but then the key relationships held by Robin. So in order for us to come up with a plan that will grow this in a way that maintains the integrity of the program and still delivers a high quality, we need to have some space in that coordination role to build those relationships.
Councillor Deaker.
Morena whanau. Thanks, Kevin. And thank you, Richard and Robin, for the work you've put into these two very good papers. I note that yours, Robin, was actually a paper from July last year, but it's still very, very good. I'm a big supporter of Enviro schools. I was trying to count up how many of my our grandchildren have been involved in Otago, and I think it's at least 16. and they've all benefited from the Enviro Schools program. The killer for me is clause 19 in Richard's paper, where the cost of $85,000 is defined. And given our 18% rate increase, there's no way I could possibly support that happening now. So my question is to you, Kevin, as to whether you would accept my moving the recommendation with a slight amendment, which would be in recommendation 2, considers the options presented for inclusion in the 23-24 annual plan. I think we've got to kick this can down the road for 12 months because to increase rates by $85,000 all on the general rate would be intolerable. There we are.
Councillor Deaker, just if I could make a comment to that, would you consider adding to that we request our chair to work through the mayoral forum to find the appetite for taking this up for next year?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that was a very good idea. I accept that. I heard that come up in the discussion earlier, and I think that's first rate, and I was glad that Andrew accepted it. So no, let's go for that. But to do what's being suggested here in the current financial circumstances we find ourselves in would be not acceptable in my opinion.
I'm comfortable with that movement. Councillor Wilson?
It makes me want to ask another question of Richard, if that's okay.
Yes.
I get that we've got a tight budget. I'm going to ask you, I see this as core comms and engagement to an extent. It's with a community that don't get to vote for us, but it is part of our community and our environmental stories that we tell. I'm wondering, what is your comms existing budget look like? And are we better to put some of that funding, even if it's not all of the 85,000, into a part-time facilitator role to start working those numbers up? Do you have any capacity to consider that as instead of advertising in papers that people barely look at these days?
No, we've got nothing. If anything, I'm concerned that we're still short in the communication engagement based on what we've seen in the community survey and the expectations, I think, around this table for us to be stronger in that space. So there is no ability to, shuffle the existing communications engagement budgets to find this resource that would need to be found either over and above the budget that we've presented as the draft annual plan.
Therefore, one other question of the mover, would he be happy with the fourth point that we ask staff and ourselves to look at other funding that may be able to bring that forward? Because if we could get the money from somewhere else, not from our ratepayers, and there may be support for that, that we could, if we could get it, that we could move it into the 23-24 year, if that funding was available from other sources like MF, Ministry for the Environmental, Ministry of Education. I don't know.
I'd want some more clarity around that motion, because that where are we looking and who am I getting to do that looking? Because I can't pull Robin off her current program. No, don't want Robin. So I mean that's opening a whole nother piece of work that we're being asked to do to fill the gap. So we'd need some more clarity around that.
Okay. Leave it at the moment. I'll think about other ways of doing it.
If I could comment on that, look, my looking at the whole scope of things that we're doing to actually increase any scope, we actually need the tank's full. We're at maximum. To go further, we actually need to fund right from the start. So, and if we fund right from the start without the enthusiasm of the TLAs to actually jump on board soon after. I think the steps that are now proposed are, I'd love to give the money right now. I know the mover would like to give the money right now. But the reality is we've just passed that 18%. We need to start within our groups, making sure that we are encouraging TLAs to get on board with this. I don't understand why Waitaki is not in there greater, because certainly there's a tremendous amount of work being done by EnviroSchools in that area. So I think we just need to start that conversation pretty jolly quickly and be quite strong that we believe this is really important. So if I go back to, I've got Councillor Forbes, sorry.
It's actually, Kate covered what I wanted to cover. The only thing that I would add to that, she actually got the answers to the question that I wanted as well, about seeking other funding. But I have to ask us around this table, as where do we prioritise? And if we are really committed to EnviroSchools as a way of leading climate change and embedding it into our education systems, leading action towards how we adapt and mitigate climate change and environmental outcomes, we would find a way of funding this. So I do need us to think about that and put that to us all. But thanks, Kate, you covered what I was after.
Actually, I think a very, very good comment, Councillor Forbes, but I suppose at the end of the day, if we're committed to sticking to that 18%, we would have to make a decision on what to remove from our existing work streams that the CE and the team have organised and that we've approved. So
exactly.
I'm not saying we can't do that, but that's the sort of thing we'd have to do.
And that's what I'd like us to think about. Exactly.
Thank you, Councillor Kelleher.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think I'm sort of drawing on the wise advice of the mover of the motion, being an educator and a communicator in his vast years of experience, that for him, I totally agree with him around we have to manage our budget, and we are getting a pretty good coverage across Otago schools, and while we do have demand for more, we are maxed out. So unfortunately, we do have to have some prudence in what we put to the ratepayers, but that isn't to say that what might evolve over the next year, this Robin and the team will continue on their very good work, and what might change with the TLAs and the right messages politically over the next year might see a very different situation with funding for the following year. So I certainly support the motion, I think, and it's just a shame we can't make that money available, but we've got to do what we have to do for the to maintain that 18%. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kelleher. Councillor Deacon, I'm just going to put that motion up. I see your hand is still up, but I'm going to put that motion up now for you to read and ensure that you're comfortable, and then I'll ask for a seconder.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's fine, except the date has not been changed. It should be 23-24 annual plan. Just can I make two other points in moving those three recommendations, Mr. Chairman? One, to Alexa, I think it's a bit unfair to put a guilt trip on all of us when you have no other suggestions about what we would drop to fund the $85,000. And the other point I'd make is there's been some mention of Ministry of Education in terms of the possible funding source. My knowledge of that is getting old, of course, but I do know that when the Ministry of Education conducts a new build, that is a new school, something happens pretty regularly in Queenstown Lakes, there is money in the budget for creating a community garden for each school if that's what the establishment board of trustees wants to do. And many of them do, of course, establish a community garden with the new school, and that's a kind of EnviroSchools activity. But other than that, there is no capital works associated funding for anything like EnviroSchools. So I formally move those three recommendations, Mr. Chairman.
Have I seconded for that, Councillor Hope? Or do you want a question? Oh, sorry, I didn't. No, sorry, my apologies. And I did have you written down to come in there, so my apologies.
No, you're fine. Can I ask Robin Zink a question? Robin, thank you, and for you, Mr. Saunders, for these good reports. Do you have any schools that opt out through no fault of their own, but then they want to opt back in again? Now, do they have to wait down the list? What's that criteria? I mean, obviously, as you say, good things happen, communities change, people in the community change, and there's a lot of positivity occurs. And my second thought to you is, or even I suppose this is to our chair here, Chair Malcolm, is there any way that in the interim that obviously we have to wait for budgets and constraints, but there's no reason why some of these schools that want to come aboard couldn't apply to the Eco Fund for their projects, is there?
Could very much fit within that.
Yes.
Possibly.
Yep.
I'm just going to get a comment from.
Yeah, look, they're two completely separate things. So absolutely, any school could apply to the Eco Fund at any point for a project. I'll let Robin speak to the opting in and opting out, and do they go to the bottom of the queue? That's the mechanics of the system I'm not familiar with. But don't conflate Enviro schools with Eco Fund. They absolutely can apply and receive funding through the Eco Fund.
I'm not trying to do that, Mr. Saunders. I'm just wondering, can they complement in a way when there's a shortfall? And we all know that, and it's on our conscience, but there's nothing really we can do but just to keep encouraging. And I just wanted to ask Robin.
Robin.
So in terms of the opting in, opting out, what we do with schools sometimes, as you said, Councillor Hope, things happen at schools, and we have had a few schools who have just gone like, this year we can't deal with, we've got too much going on, and sometimes that's a new principal or a lot of staff turnover or whatever, and we do say, yep, we'll come back to you at the end of the year and relook at your engagement at that point. And we've had a couple of schools this year, at the beginning of this year, where we'd had that conversation, and one decided that no, they really didn't have capacity within their current planning and staff to carry on with Enviro schools, and another school that is raring to go and fully on board. So we do give schools that opportunity. And I just wanted to make one comment in defence of the Waitaki District Council. They have actually just recently doubled their resourcing of Enviro schools. So
and may I make a comment back how great that is, because in my first term here with Councillor Noon, we really had to champion that, and we had to badger.
Yes.
So I think that's a fantastic statement, and well done. And well done, Waitaki, and you, Councillor Malcolm, up there, no doubt pushing it.
Any further debate?
Kevin, just wanted to say, could we have this paper plus the outcome of the resolution sent to Mariana Brook, who is the senior advisor for the Merrill Forum? It just means that then we trigger that step, so she's aware of this discussion and outcome. Thank you.
Excellent. Yep. That will be noted by the secretary. Yep. Councillor Wilson.
I will support this begrudgingly. Yep. I can find money for other schools to get in, and that would be other schools opting out who have had this subsidy to their education for years. This is such a good program, they should adopt it and pay for it themselves. And the Education Department Ministry is always finding excuses not to pay for time which children are learning. They should be. Should be core funding. But so I'm putting out there that if we don't get more money in the 23-24 year, should I be here to influence that? It will be, I will be saying that we have to change the policy that schools don't get it as a right. There are schools that simply have never been able to get on the ladder. This is a general rated funded project that some people are putting money into, and their children have never benefited from that. Others are being subsidised every year by those families, and that's just not fair. So we either make it a general funded and generally accessible program, or we don't. And that's where it has to go otherwise. I totally understand the efficiencies of going back to a school that already has it in their school program and all of that, and we don't want to make Robin's job even harder, but equity would require us to actually provide it to those schools at some stage. And that's the problem that we're trying to fix here. And you can't fix that by putting it off and kicking it down the can down the road all the time and not providing it to those schools that have never had it. So that's why I'm really hot on it, but I understand why at the moment. And taking away from all of that, thank you to all of those facilitators, to all those schools that are doing a fantastic job, and especially to you, Robin. This is one of the good news stories that we should be really, really proud of being part of. So, and will make Otago a much better place in the future because we're investing at the right level. Thank you.
I'll take one more speaker, and we have Councillor Forbes.
I just want to totally and completely tautoko Kate's comments. I absolutely agree. This is the right level to invest in, and we need to figure it out. And the equity problem, you're right on the money with that. Thank you.
Lovely. So we've had 3 talkers in the affirmative. Have we got any to the contrary to the motion? Are you speaking against the motion?
I need to get the right to speak now.
I'm speaking in a cautious sense to the motion. Is that against it? I don't know. My caution would be just that when we are working to expand the program, it's not only the problem that Kate says about other people not being able to get in, but the easier ones, I would guess, to facilitation things are the very ones who least need it. So I would guess that the ones who get in first are the well-organised ones who fill in forms and who have a school population who are easier to marshal and things. And the very ones who maybe most benefit from it wouldn't be easy to take on in the program because they would require, I would guess, more facilitation and more help. So I would like to know that not only was the more sort of equity and potential new ones, but that when you put too much stress in the system, you'll take, of course, the only ones you can manage. You can manage 17 if they're relatively easy and 3 if they're not. What are you going to do? That those difficult ones are not. So I'm just putting a message of caution in when we're looking at in the future where it's going. So I am going to support it.
Thank you. Look, just to the mover and the second, I'd just make one comment is that we've actually put no date on this mayoral forum, and knowing that the chair will do something very quickly, but I think it's very important that we get this issue into our back to council and ensuring that we are having it front and centre before we start next year's deliberations on our annual plan. So we know right from the early stages when we're talking annual plans, so we've actually got a sum that we're going to allocate to this. And then it may be at that stage we have to look at budget saying, well, we're going to chip something else out because we need to really promote this ahead. So I just wonder if the speaker can give us a date of the next mayoral forum or the one up, when would you think appropriate so we can get. It's a very appropriate day for that meeting. Are you comfortable with that? If you could put that up on the screen.
Sure.
If the mover and seconder could just look at that wee alteration. So that's our chair going to the next mayoral forum meeting, the April meeting.
Yeah, happy with that, Kevin.
Happy, seconder? Yep. Well, thank you. Although we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Richard. Look, there is an extreme sentiment that we want this project going really, really well. We just really want to ensure that Robin is doing that 0.8, not 6.3 or whatever she probably is doing. So let's keep this front of mind and keep ensuring that we are ahead of the game for next round. Thank you. That concludes our items. And before we close the meeting, wait on. Yep, I haven't even said it, but that's good. We have a mover, Councillor Calvert, seconded Councillor Wilson. Those in favour? Thank you.
Declare the meeting closed, please.
Meeting closed. Eh?